All right, folks, welcome back to the Spark Show. Today is a very big day for us as we accomplish a small achievement in our long, line of goals that we have for the Spark Show. Today is episode 10 of the Spark Show, finally running into the double digits on our podcast, and we couldn't be happier. Welcome, Cameron, our co-host of the Spark Show, back onto the show. It's great to have you here, Cam, and to have the conversation continue. Today we're going to do a little something special, and we're going to commit this conversation to faith, as we haven't had many conversations centered around faith. So today we're going to open up and discuss a little bit about Jesus Christ, God Almighty, and our walk back to faith.
Yeah, probably more nervous for this one than anything else. It's pretty funny how that works.
It's hard for us as grown men to get vulnerable and speak and be outward in our faith, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm more nervous for this than anything else. So
seems like talking politics and taking a pretty hard stance on some of the things that we have deep convictions in when it comes to policy, culture, politics in general. It's a little bit easier to spit into the microphone than to speak the word of God, in which I'm not going to sit here and claim that I am a perfect Christian Catholic. I'm still somebody who struggles to get to church every Sunday. And I am still very much walking back to God myself. But we just thought it was a good idea to speak about our past and the things that have walked us back to a relationship with God, and ultimately allowed Jesus Christ back into our lives. And what are the things that have transpired that have walked us back into our faith, and things that make us more deeply convicted in our belief in God.
Yeah, it's really hard to articulate the intangibles. So here we go.
Yeah, so for me, I was, became a confirmed Catholic pretty young. That was, my mom is a Spaniard, and so we come from deep Spaniard roots. As many know, Spaniards are heavily and deeply convicted Catholics, as I learned when I lived in Spain for a brief moment of time back in 2012. The culture there is very heavily centered around Catholicism, and you can see it in the history. La Sagrada Familia, the famous cathedral there.
Did you see the Pope's visit there?
Absolutely. Sorry to spin this off, but I'm also a Lego fanatic. But Lego just released La Sagrada Familia as one of their architecture sets, which I was pretty stoked about.
Heck yeah.
So great to see faith coming into the Lego community, and representing quite a feat for architecture and Catholicism in general.
Yeah, the service that they put on there was pretty incredible. The children choir, it's just like, it's amazing how angelic children's voices can be, and just like that pitch that they can hit, that's just like, it just strikes a chord in you. It's amazing.
Well, the organ and everything they have inside the cathedral, the stained glass, the architecture within not the four walls, there's many walls, but the inside of that cathedral is an incredible, I can't explain it. It's a sensation that overcomes you. You almost walk yourself right back through history and all the time that the religion of Catholicism has, occupied this earth. And it brings you, the only place it brings you is back to God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very interesting to kind of see the surge going on in Spain, because Spain has some interesting things going on with its politics. I mean, I don't really know too much about the politics, but the guy is very left-wing, the president. I saw some interesting policy decisions. I'm pretty sure he just decreed people, migrants, to become citizens by the pen. No legislative process at all. Just, 500,000 African migrants are now Spanish citizens, And it's very questionable, to say the least. But then to see the hero's welcome that the Pope received was kind of shocking. You see him enter into this football stadium, and it's just packed all the way up into the rafters, and everyone is just losing their mind. And it's just like, there seems to be this huge surge for moral clarity and all this ambiguity.
Yeah, and I think that moral clarity, it yearns from at the core the spirit that is conservative, which a conservative's morality is usually derived from a religious perspective or
Hmm.
religious core values, which usually starts with the Ten Commandments. And when we start to abandon those core values and things that at our core help us understand the world, then we become a little bit lost in our way and we start to fear the world rather than have belief in it.
Well, so much of the Western world is dominated by the thought of my truth. You see it all the time. That's my truth. That's my truth. And it's like, well, wait, what? My truth? There's the truth. There's your perspective on the truth because, we all have different perspectives and we all see different things, different aspects, but there is only one truth. 2 + 2 = 4. Sorry, communists, it does not equal 5 or whatever their math was. Have you ever seen the communist equation? It's pretty wild.
Can't say I've spent much time going over the communist equation. I usually try to stay away from that literature. It's not really one that I keep in my quiver.
Well, you got to understand your enemy.
That's true.
But at the end of it, it's, there's, I don't know, it's one of these things I talk to people about. It's kind of like the languages of God, in the book of John refers to the book of Genesis, and it says, the word of God, in the beginning there was the word, and the word was with God, and the word was God. So the word is God. So God is the language of the universe. And if you kind of like dissect that, well, what does that mean? And then you look at our DNA, and in one cell, there's 3 billion letters. So there's 3 billion letters that create our genetic code, and then we understand code, in terms of, digital code, zeros and ones, and look at what that is able to create. And then so you see the genetic code, 3 billion, and then you see how many cells are in our body. So you go 3 billion times for the average male, it's something like 30 trillion. So, I mean, you're talking about a coded genetic code, a genetic language that was created. And here we are materialized on this earth. And then, so genetic code is like biological code. Then you have physics and you have chemistry. And so you have the languages, those mathematics, and that's all logical. It's extremely logical. And that's the way the universe forms. And so, we have like this imperfect sort of creation myth, as they like to call it, but it's grounded in logic when you start to really dissect these things. And it's like, it's mind boggling because it's like, okay, look at how the universe seemingly goes on to infinity. But then that's when we're looking through telescopes. Then when we're looking at life through microscopes, it seems to go on infinitesimally. It's wild to see.
Well, I will say that that is one thing that I struggle to articulate with my faith and reality. As part of my struggle with keeping my faith as a young man, was this idea of creation. You start to really heavily think into that, and you can start to really fight this idea that one man, one God, could have been responsible for creating this heavenly earth. And the more you think about it, and I have to give Grand Canyon University a lot of credit for this, for walking me back on my faith in creation and giving me the right understanding of how all this came to be and why no science can actually prove that God is not real. The only thing that is capable of creating something so grand and something so big out of nothing is God Almighty. And that's the only thing that you can explain creation with. It's the only thing that you could fall back on.
Well, our exploration of space has proved to us how unique our Earth is. You know what I mean? So it's like you keep zooming out on the solar systems, and you just keep zooming out, zooming out, zooming out. And it's like, okay, where are the other habited planets, And the best guesses are millions of light years away, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a um, astrophysicist or whatever they're called. You know what I mean? But I certainly know these distances we're talking about are described in light years, and it's just like mind-boggling. But when you just look at like the laws of probability and you look at like the Goldilocks zone of like, okay, what are the chances that a planet is X amount of distance around a sun to where it can actually be inhabited, in the perfect temperature zone? And then when you're looking at like the decimal points of the probability, and it's like, what is the saying in a preponderance of evidence? And like, so you just see this like preponderance of evidence. It's like there's no direct evidence, right? But it's like you start to collect these things and it's like, it's mind boggling. I mean, just go and look at what the probability of the earth to be where it's at, and then look at the diversity of the earth. It's like, how many species do we have? And then how many subspecies? And then it's just like the biological life. Then you have um, all the flora, the plants, and like all the diversity within the plants. And I mean, it's mind-boggling. It's like, what is going on here? And so it seems to be some sort of expression. And do we just boil it down to it's an expression of love and creativity? Because from love springs creativity. Think about our own human creativity. What are the most, it's always a cry of the heart, sad music or happy films or sad films. It's all from the heart.
You know, one thing that when I was younger that always had me curious about faith in God was studying the stars. When I would learn about history and all of the incredible men, that existed in time, that I always just had a very peculiar fascination of, Magellan. Um, oh, geez, who am I thinking of? Not Picasso, but I'm having a brain fart here. Uh,
Explorers.
yeah, all the explorers, Columbus, anybody who's navigating the seas by the stars. I'm trying to think. Is an Italian. Um, he was known. He was. Oh, I'm having a total brain fart. This is not good.
Well, describe what he did.
He was known as like a pagan, and he was eventually, because of his science experiments, he was, accused of paganism and all these sort of things because of his radical experiments. Da Vinci,
Oh,
Leonardo da
okay.
Vinci,
Okay.
because he was always pushing the limits, trying to understand things in time. And even he was one of the artists, eventually became sort of like a political figure. But he had big pushback from like the Catholic Church in particular, because of his, searching for answers and, scientific approach to everything. But searching and looking up to the stars was always something that was inspired by, from these artists or these men that were constantly pushing the limits, trying to get answers to figure out what was going on in the universe. How do we figure this place out? And ultimately, I think a lot of these men uh, were convicted in faith
Mm-hmm.
at the end of it. And so that was one thing that inspired me. And I want to, before we get too lost in astrology and getting lost in space, quickly kind of jump back to how did you end up, Cameron, at this point in time? How were you raised? How did you come to be into the Catholic faith?
Well, a little family history, faith history. I believe my dad is baptized Methodist, and my mom is a baptized Catholic. Not active at all. Just kind of, they were just baptized by birth, and that was about it. My mom went to Catholic school up until like eighth grade, And my oldest brother, he went through the whole process. He was baptized, confirmed, all that good stuff. But my second brother, to my knowledge, he didn't go through that process. I certainly didn't go through that process. And we have both have a 6 year age gap in between. So my oldest brother is 12 years older than me. Um, and but my I've always had a personal relationship with God, and that came from my experience with drowning as a young toddler. My relationship with God started from a very early age when I nearly drowned in the pool, or I guess I did technically drown. I just didn't die. I was about 2 to 3 years old, and I found my way past the pool gate that my mom and dad had put up, and I was riding my bicycle around the pool, and my pant leg got stuck in my chain when I was trying to do little wheelies up some steps that I guess my oldest brother would have taught me how to do. And when I didn't have enough torque to do the wheelie, my wheel had bounced off the coping and put me straight into the pool. And it pulled me down. And I mean, I'm almost 35 now, so trying to remember back to when I'm 3, I can just remember the stories that I've told people you know, throughout the time. And I can remember struggling and trying to swim to the surface. And eventually, I just started to inhale water, and the struggle stopped. And I turned and looked at the pool light, and the light turned on, and it just got brighter and brighter and brighter until it was the brightest light. And then I woke up in the hospital. And the story goes, a few months later, when my parents, their best friend's baby had died of SIDS, everyone was grieving. And here's me, little toddler Cameron, coming in and saying that it was okay. Baby Martin was with God. And people were shocked by it, but, they just discounted, oh, he saw it in a movie. He saw, it's just, you know. So I already had this concept of God from when I was a toddler. And I can remember anytime I was afraid of the dark, it was always the dark. I was always afraid of the monsters under my bed or the monsters in my closet. And I would just bury my head in my pillow and I would just pray to God for the monsters to go away. And, fast forward, still no church, no nothing like that. When I was in my early 20s, I think I was either 21 or 22 years old, I went to a motocross track. You were there with my best friend, who I would have met shortly after my experience with drowning. We were, basically still in diapers, barely able to talk. And he was killed in a motorcycle accident right in front of me. And that was a surreal experience. I've never been in a state of shock before. But when the accident happened, it's very interesting. I don't have any memory of seeing the impact, but all I can remember is that when so like in the sport of motocross, I don't know, things are happening so fast. So I had seen him entering a obstacle and then lost eyesight, and then I just assumed he would have been at the next obstacle, and then I didn't see him, and then I looked forward, and then I looked back, and then I saw people starting to run, and then I knew immediately by instinct that that was him. So ran over to him and immediately saw his lifeless body, but saw he had some blood coming from his humerus, and another guy, and I immediately knew, okay, we need to get a tourniquet because some sort of bleeding is happening here. And so we ran over to the first truck that we saw and just somehow knew exactly where the guy's bag was, grabbed a belt, and then ran back over. The other gentleman had secured the tourniquet, but I don't know who called 911. Someone called it. But right in that moment, I knew it wasn't good. And I got angry with God. And I told him very forcefully inside my mind, don't you take my best friend away from me. Almost telling God what to say. And in that moment, I was overcome with guilt because I knew what had happened. And then I simply just said a prayer, and I prayed that Tommy would go and enter into paradise. And I felt Christ. I felt the presence of the Lord right there. I didn't see anything, but in this state of shock, time didn't exist. It was very strange. My perception of time was gone. And I knew that I could feel almost like I can see it in my mind's eye. It's the strangest feeling, but I just see the Lord Jesus Christ bathed in white light. And I can just see his face, and I can see the white robes and his arms open with his hands welcoming. And it's wild. And I thanked God, and I said, basically, as I said, please, Tommy, don't linger. Go with the Lord. And then paramedics arrived. They did everything that they tried to do. And all of a sudden, it was empty. No one was around. I think maybe his parents had arrived, and the police, everyone was like starting to leave. And then I had to pick up the motorcycle, put it in the back of my truck, and then get back into my truck. And when I went to go back into my truck and I looked over in the empty seat, then I felt the presence of God again right there for the second time. And then I was just kind of beside myself and proceeded to drive home and get shit-faced drunk. And then it was time to search for answers. And so what I began to do is I went to Barnes and Noble, and I bought books on numerology. I bought, all the things that the world had offered. I didn't turn to Christianity because I had already, in my mind, discounted Christianity because of the hardness of hearts that I witnessed with Christians and their judgment and how they would judge other people, or at least how I would perceive it as judgment. And the best way I could describe that is like seeing someone like preaching to stop abortion, and it, from the layman, the person that has never really wrestled with that, it looks offensive and you're offended by it. So I was the person that was offended by stuff like that. No longer am I offended by it. I encourage it, but that's kind of like the conclusions I came to. So I turned to, the world's religions. I studied Hinduism, I studied Buddhism, Zenism, Confucianism. Eventually led me to Islam because I really respected the devotion that Muslims have to like praying 5 times a day, and just I liked the structure of it. I liked everything that it said. And my wife, she's Muslim, and so I had to, in order to be married, I converted to Islam, and which I was more than willing and happy to do, because at this point I'm thinking that God is, God loves all religions. God is all religions. They're just kind of like different flavors. What was it? My reasoning was all paths lead to the same summit is my reasoning. And so I wasn't really afraid of it at all. I was encouraged by it. Love the architecture, the mosques. I mean, how beautiful it is. So there's a lot of beauty. And so got married, started having kids, and then I started getting the call from God. Started having panic attacks and things like that because I started really to face my own morality. I remember this one delusional moment I had. I just turned 30 years old, a little drunk. I walk into my bathroom and I look at myself in the mirror and I say to myself, am I really going to die? And I'm like, I don't think so. Maybe I am God. And then my eyes, red flag, like, whoa, what was that thought? And then I repressed it. I'm like, that was crazy. That was crazy. Maybe I'm Jesus. Whoa, no, that's a little crazy. And kind of walked away from that. And then a few years later, I've been dealing with anxiety and stuff like that, but I would usually just like meditate, pray, and it would go away. And then I started having, I think it's called cervogenic dizziness. And I didn't know this at the time, but I would get these weird things where I'm like, it feels like I'm floating in space. I'm completely disconnected from reality. And immediately my fear centers are going off. And I'm thinking to myself, I've got a tumor. I've got something's going on. Like the blood flow to my brain is being restricted, which it is. And the reason why it is because there's a vertebrae that's out of socket because I was T-boned years prior. And so now it's starting to manifest. And, but then I'm super afraid and I'm starting to turn to God. And then I eventually, start thinking to myself, okay, how am I going to do this? And, oh, you know what? Sorry, I need to back up a little bit. I forgot to say, I did when I became Muslim, I studied the Quran, and I read it. And what my biggest problem with it, because if you remember, I studied the Eastern philosophies. So I love like the philosophy side, the wisdom, all that sort of stuff. And the Quran absolutely has that. But it read to me as a logical refutation of the Jews say this, the Christians say this, but this is the truth. And over and over and over, I saw that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But there was nothing that like spoke to my heart that like explained the nature of reality. And it was just like, it just left me wanting. And so I read it, I made it about halfway through, and I put it down, just out of laziness and neglect. And a few months later, started getting this panic attack again. And I was like, okay, God's telling me I need to finish this. And so because I basically drive for a living, I pulled out my phone and I went, I'm going to listen to the Quran. So I downloaded the Quran, and a suggestion alongside of that was Bible in the Year with Father Mike Schmitz. And I thought that was curious. So I was like, oh, you know what? I've never read the Bible. I've never listened to the Bible. You hear, Christians quoting different things, John 3:16, stuff like that. But never really gave it a serious shot. So I thought to myself, actually, I'm going to listen to this. And almost immediately it was epiphany after epiphany, just like, this makes sense. This makes sense. Oh, wow, this makes sense. And, when you're being guided through the Bible by a Catholic priest who went to seminary, basically college, for this and can connect the various aspects of the Bible. And what a lot of people don't think is they think the Bible is only chronological, but it's not. It's constantly referencing itself. And actually, I credit Jordan Peterson to opening my eyes of the Bible, because him explaining kind of just like the what's it called? The benefits, psychological benefits of like how Christianity kind of like formed our society and stuff like that. Kind of that started to soften my heart for the scripture. So basically, at this point, I'm listening and I'm going, "Oh wow, wait a minute!" And now I'm questioning my Muslim faith. Like, okay, what's going on here? And then now I'm in an internal struggle because now I have to talk to my wife about, hey, I think I'm gonna become a Christian. I think I need to become a Christian. I think we all need to become Christians. We all need to accept Jesus Christ. Because remember, I've always believed in Jesus Christ, and one of the things that Islam does is Islam affirms the reality of Jesus, but they just say he's a prophet. And then my biggest problem with Islam comes down to the point of, okay, so Islam concedes that Jesus was sinless, that Jesus performed miracles, everything, except he didn't die on a cross. In fact, God put someone else up there to make him look like Jesus died on the cross, and really he ascended. And the reason why that is because Muhammad taught that God would never allow his prophets to be humiliated like that. And which is completely against scripture because prophets are constantly being humiliated and cast into sewers and stuff like that. And people are, the Israelites are ignoring, God's prophets and God's teachers, like repent, come back.
Yep.
So it's like, I'm seeing this struggle, and it's like a struggle for authority. And then it's just kind of like, I'm sorry, but what you're saying is if God deceived everyone and that someone did die on the cross, but it wasn't Jesus, Jesus ascended to heaven, that would make God a liar.
Yeah.
Deception is a lie.
Let me ask you one question, because I think maybe a lot of the listeners might be curious about this, but how did it go when you had that conversation with your wife?
She was supportive. You have to, for her, your spiritual journey is your spiritual journey. And it's like, you have to do that. You have to figure that out for yourself. So she was supportive. But I'm sure it's, jarring, right? Because now you're at a clash with cultures and things like that. I can see, people being offended in many ways, but at the end of the day, I'm taught to love and to love all and to have an open heart to everyone. So that's how I feel. I love my Muslim brothers and sisters. I love everyone. I don't hold any ill will towards anyone just because we might disagree.
I know your wife. I met her before you guys got married. She's an amazing woman. She has an incredible amount of grace, and it's easy to see how she could be so understanding and accepting of a big decision like that, which is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to walk it back just a little bit, talk to you about my journey into Catholicism, and also I want to touch base on that harshness that we can experience of loss
Mm-hmm.
and what that does to us as Christians in a Catholic. So when I was quite younger, I started my journey at the Catholic Church probably at the end of elementary school. So I was probably about 10, 11 years old. And I had started the program at the Catholic Church at the time, which was called CCD. I'm not sure if that's still the program that they have at the church. Is the same church that we still attend and go to when we do attend. And at a young age, I was taught the Ten Commandments. So my morality started to be guided by the Ten Commandments and the Word of God. And I started to have that relationship with God really young. My understanding wasn't exactly all there. However, as I got older and started going through the steps of confirmation, junior high, it's an interesting process doing the confirmation when you're at a young age in the Catholic Church, because you're at odds with dealing with puberty. There's tribalism within school and a public school environment, popularity, and how committed do you want to be to your faith at a young age? Because I remember going on a Catholic retreat, which was the end phase of the confirmation process at the Catholic Church, and so we went to a church camp up in Fraser Park, and I was all about it. I wanted to have that spiritual connection. I wanted to do what I needed to do to have that connection with God and to confirm my faith and to become this official member of the Catholic Church. I wanted to wear that cross on my sleeve. And the one thing that happened to me at Catholic retreat was the very last ceremony or process that they had us go through, in which they had us bear our own cross, and they reenacted us being put on a cross to sort of feel what this would have felt like maybe for Jesus. And in that moment, I felt like maybe that violated something very sacred. And I questioned the Catholic Church. And I said, why God would they make me do this? Why would they have me bear a cross? And so I started to, that's when my questions about the Catholic faith began.
It's a hard truth.
It is. And I started to, at the time, this was when, there were news stories breaking of Catholic priests and all these sorts of different members of the Catholic Church molesting children. People started questioning the morality of, members of the Catholic Church. And so questions start spiraling in my mind, and I'm starting to have these lived experiences as a young man. And I'm starting to wonder, how can
How is
members,
this true?
how is this true? How can members of this church be corrupt? How could they be doing wrong when this is supposed to be the ultimate moral clarity that you can experience in life? How could this exist? But what we aren't taught so young, or what we're not understanding, is that evil can corrupt anywhere and anyone. This isn't just, you're immune.
There are no safe havens.
No. And evil and the devil can be found within the church as well.
Yeah, this is Satan's domain.
Right. And, one of the things, and this is funny, some people might think I'm a little bit crazy, but Mel Gibson did a really bang up job on me when I was young in some of the films he created.
Yeah.
Okay. Because as a young man, I loved the movies about the Catholic Crusaders and the Christian Crusaders and all of the wars and the sacrifice and dying a noble death and the knights,
Brotherhood.
the kings, and how the world came to be medieval times.
God wills it.
God wills it. Yeah.
Kingdom of heaven.
Let's go. And, it's an incredible thing to feel like you're religious or that you have faith as a young man. You also have to put into perspective that we live in a time where, looking back on history, we do not live under the same conditions whatsoever. We live in the greatest nation to ever exist, and we live under this guise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which are our main focuses now in life. That is a privilege, and these men that existed prior to us that were fighting for God's will and his conquest and were on these crusades, you see these mass volume of men dying for what, we thought was a noble cause, a conquest, a fight for the world and to spread a certain faith, Christianity or, Islam, whatever it was. And you don't understand that the perception of the world was much different back then, when your conditions of living aren't just trying to raise up a family, buy a house, and you're not living under this threat of a horde of savages coming through and wiping out your family and your farm and your crops, or a evil tax collector from the king coming to, rape and do all these horrific things to your family and stuff if you're not going to pay your taxes. And so for me, I watched all these incredible movies growing up, thinking that when I experienced death, that I was going to have an easy time digesting it because it's under much different conditions now. And I think one of the things we like to think as Christians, Catholics, is that we're going to have an easy time digesting when we experience a loss, and the grieving process won't hurt us so much because we have our faith. But what I've experienced, and being there with you with Tommy and his passing, and seeing something like that happen at a young age, and being a young man, watching my dad's aunt go through breast cancer, inevitably passing away, and watching my dad's grieving process, watching great grandparents pass away at a young age, and watching the grieving process for my mom, seeing all these things happen, and then understanding and starting to get that humility that starts to build up in you that our time will eventually come. and the ones that we love most dearest and hold closest to our hearts are eventually going to perish, that our faith matters more than ever because eventually they will be gone. But having your faith doesn't make the losses any easier, but it helps us to understand why. And it
Mm-hmm.
also gives us that moral clarity of, well, there is an ultimate eternal life that is to be achieved and a place where we will all once again be together.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like that's the importance of Catholicism for me. And, especially now having a family, um, is knowing that I can pass on something to my kids that will give them a reassurance that this isn't it right
Yeah.
here, you know?
Well, one of the things that you sparked in me when you were talking about how could, these people be corrupted, these priests in this institution, set up by God, or so they claim. And I just go back to when Jesus renames Simon Peter and says, Peter, on this rock, I will build the church and the gates of hell will not prevail. Well, when you think of that, the gates of hell will not prevail. So what does that mean? He's not saying I'm going to establish a walled garden where the forces of hell will not prevail against us. It's the other way around. We're going into hell, into the gates. So that means that those forces can come in as well and attack, So it's one of those things where,
Call
you
that the
know,
Trojan horse.
yeah. So it's that doesn't really bother me because humans are fallible and they harden their hearts, and once they start to lead themselves, once they start to be led with my truth, my experience, why I'm a good person. I should be able to do what I want to do, love who I want to love, that sort of thing, and you exalt yourself above the natural order established by God, and then that's when things start to spiral. Because once you can allow one of those in, now all of them can come in behind it and flood in, and you can constantly be questioning. And, the way I see it is kind of like, when you see Christian or people who purport to be Christians getting very angry about the abortion topic. I think there's someone that comes along my feed. I think it's called Abolition Rising or something like this. And they just stand out with signs, and advocating against abortion and kind of like illustrating the horrors of it. And it makes people very, very angry, and then they purport to be Christians and they're, well, why are you putting that in? That's not nice. Like where in Christianity it says that we have to be nice. It says that we have to speak the truth, and the truth isn't always nice. But I'm sorry, go ahead and continue your story.
Oh, I was,
Journey back to faith.
yeah. So for me, it's, being a grown man now, there's been some things that have happened to me in my life. A lot of those things have been
Health
experiencing
troubles.
health troubles, experiencing losses of my own. One of the most compounding traumas of my life happened back in 2021 when we're going through the peak of COVID. My wife was pregnant with our first child. At that same time, about 4 to 5 months into the pregnancy, my father-in-law tragically passed away, not from COVID, but from other health complications.
Mm-hmm.
And to watch my wife grieve and go through this horrific process after we had experienced 3 prior losses in pregnancy, leading up to our first successful, viable pregnancy, and then to then experience the loss of her father, who is the only parent in her life actively involved. Her rock was a very tragic experience, and I felt the weight of the world then fall onto me as a father and a husband. In that moment, I hadn't become a father yet, but I had been in the process of attempting to become a father, and I knew that we had our first viable pregnancy. We had gotten past that first trimester, in which, after the first trimester in pregnancy, the viability of a pregnancy increases substantially. And we did eventually give birth to our first child, our daughter, and what happened after that was just a beautiful blossom of life. And that has evolved now into, 3 children. But with 3 children, my wife and I have experienced, nine or endured 9 pregnancies in total. So it
Mm-hmm.
didn't come without sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an incredibly tough process on my wife. The toll it takes on a woman's body, and she had to have several DNCs, which are essentially abortions performed on fetuses that were either non-viable, or ones that were genetically just not forming like a human. It was like a cluster of uh, almost like tumor cells or something that would grow just out of bad, uh, you know, misfire or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was one thing that definitely, has walked me back to my faith and tried to give me comfort is, the unborn lives that I never got to meet, the ones that were viable, but we lost a heartbeat or something like that. And we never looked into, we never knew the sex of the children other than one of our lost fetuses. And,
Mm-hmm.
it's knowing that we were going to have a daughter, another daughter that we lost on the way, that I
Yeah.
pray for. And I wonder, even though she never came to be, that, I don't know, maybe she's raising up in heaven, she's
Mm-hmm.
becoming something more up in heaven. And maybe one day I will meet that child, And so I think for Christians and Catholics, that's why we take a deeper meaning to heart for unborn lives, because especially on earth, we have laws that prosecute the murder and the killing of, you know, people that are living, but those same laws should apply to unborn lives as well. And so
Mm-hmm.
there's this conflict of morality when it comes to the abortion argument as to why can we treat something that's, just within a woman's body as if it were just garbage, and make this reckless and completely just senseless decision to terminate that life when we're not called to be the executor or the judge.
Well, we value the autonomy of the woman, right? And it's all about her autonomy and her decision. And there's this sort of idea that the fetus um, is hers, right? It's not its own unique individual identity, and that identity doesn't come until birth,
Well,
you
they
know?
say they say that, this unborn life is essentially dependent on the mother, right?
Mm-hmm.
Inside the womb. But the argument is that the child is still dependent on the mother when it comes outside the womb. What is it?
Yes.
What is it that the child needs when it's born?
Well, yeah, exactly. That's my point. It's like, is it the umbilical cord? It's like it's still its own individual, even if it's this big, you know? And I was a advocate of abortion before having children, before, coming to Christ. And, you know, my reasoning always centered on, you know, the woman and economics and things like that. But the minute I actually held an innocent child in my arms and I saw how vulnerable life is, and like, especially you with your guys' 9 pregnancies, you start to appreciate it way more. You realize you don't take it for granted. And it's really easy to take it for granted. It's just one of those things, and then people always kind of throw the emotional arguments. What if your daughter was raped? What if this, that, and the other? And I understand how emotionally triggering those things are. It's very, very, it strikes you deep. I would want justice. I would want justice for my daughter, but I would also want dignity for my grandchild. It doesn't matter that the father is a corrupt fool. That's still my grandchild. And I would love it more than anything in the world. And it's one of those things. Oh, well, but a teenage pregnancy? Still, it's my grandchild.
Right.
And I have to raise my grandchild as my child because my child was too stupid to use contraception, or I was too stupid to teach the realities of sex and biology and try to instill that morality in her. Or she was just a human being wanting to search out those experiences. Still, it comes down to my responsibility as a father. you know, and not taking God's, you know, put me on this earth to be a father, to be a grandfather. And so I'm not going to abdicate that for my own comfort.
Yeah, it's hard to say. The other argument is that a life conceived in an act of evil, is it worth any less? Because
Hmm.
the argument is that it's still life worth living.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get past that act of evil and this idea that we have a decision, you know, and so that's one.
You know, one of the most beautiful stories that I've seen is a an unwanted pregnancy with a woman with Down syndrome, and everyone wanted her to abort the child because how can a mother with Down syndrome have a baby? You know, and she absolutely refused, and she had that baby, and that baby is grown up now and perfectly healthy, perfectly normal, and it's a beautiful thing because it's just you know, it's like an inversion. You know, what about how comfortable is that for her? What are her economic situation? You know, this, and it's like, well, this is where a faith in God comes in because everything that I have been given in life has been a gift. I haven't earned anything. It's not because of me. You know what I mean? It's, yeah, sure. Like I did the work. I gave some advice. Like, but the opportunities. I mean, it's kind of like out of thin air. The doors just appeared. Well, who offered the door? You know what I mean? And it's like that was God. So God is going to take care. So it's like have a little faith.
Mhm.
Have a little faith that everything is going to be okay. And the thing is it's one of those things when you're a kid, it's very hard to, you know, self-sacrifice. You know, that's what love is ultimately. I see all these things running around Instagram explaining what love is. Love is this, love is kind, love is, and yes, but at the core of love is self-sacrifice, and that is evident of Jesus on the cross. That is the epitome of love. It's no longer about yourself. It's about everyone else around you and serving them. That is the ultimate act of love.
Absolutely. And I'm going to shift a little bit into another perspective of the things that really walk us into our faith. And one of those things is our health. And, when you become humbled by this idea that, we are not a infinite,
Being,
infinitesimal
yeah,
being, that we have
exactly.
an expiration date, um, we quickly come to this realization how much that our health matters. And the way that it happened for me, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease back when I was 18 years old. And over a decade, I resisted every step of the way the pharmaceutical approach at treating Crohn's disease, which includes immunotherapy regimens and other medications.
Chemotherapy or low dose chemo, right?
Well, that was essentially the first, medication they had for me, the option, and I just resisted that at every step. I was like, I am not doing that. That is not for me. I am not going to get cancer at a young age and die. So I took the minimal approach, or I took the less therapeutic approach, which was these, taking steroids when I would have a flare up,
Hmm.
taking these anti-inflammatory medications, which turn my urine purple, and always, just weird things. And over a decade, I thought I was okay. I thought, oh, I'm just
You're
battling
managing it.
this chronic inflammation, and things were slowly falling into decline with my health. And I finally had to make this decision that if I wanted to be the father that I ultimately wanted to be, and the husband that I wanted to be, and be a strong leader, a supporter, and a provider for my family, that I was eventually going to have to make a pretty tough decision when it came to my health. And that decision came when I had a follow up, finally got with some great doctors and surgeons at UCLA. I had an MRI done on my intestines because I was dealing with some pretty horrific flare ups that couldn't be controlled with steroids. Um, and when you become steroid dependent, things can really quickly start to spiral out of control.
Hmm.
And I was pitched this idea that the best approach for me was going to be removing 10 centimeters of my small bowel. I had to repair some fistulas that were starting to grow due to the diseased tissue that was starting to overcome my abdomen area, and things were just starting to get really bad. Um, I went through a crazy phase where I told my wife I was maybe going to go to the Cayman Islands to try to get, stem cell therapy
Mm-hmm.
that could reverse my, disease and,
Mm-hmm.
do this in the most minimally
Invasive.
invasive way possible. I think I
Mm-hmm.
scared the living hell out of my wife with that thought. She thought,
Yeah.
well, you're going to go to the Cayman Islands and probably die, whatever you do there.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about spending our life savings at the time, which, uh, she was just not very happy about to go do that. And
Mm-hmm.
so with my insurance, she was like, well, you have insurance here, and these surgeons are the best in the world, and they're giving you a plan, and you can get medication here that can handle this. And so, you know what? I listened to my wife ultimately, and I went through with the surgery. I, um, you know, had an ostomy bag for 4 months while they took out my intestine and had to allow some healing to happen in there. And I had to get off the steroids during that crazy time, right after it was like 2 or 3 days after I had my surgery to, have the intestine removed. My wife comes and taps me on the shoulder downstairs with a positive pregnancy test for our second child. And I am just thinking, like, man, that last hurrah right before the surgery really paid out, huh?
Yep.
And so God delivered on that promise for us. Gave us our second child. I, was reversed, had all my intestines put back together 4 months later, and I think so. That was April, and then May, June. By June, I was reversed, and September came along, and we had our second baby. And I could tell you, just even 4 or 5 short months after having that surgery, I mean, and having a second child, I felt like Superman.
Yeah.
And that was when I found, like, God gave me my second lease on life. And I remember, before my surgery, being rolled into that surgical room, I told God, I said, God, if you get me out of this situation, I am going to do the best that I can for my family, for myself, and for you. Please just get me out of this situation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not to say that he can give us that or do those
Or he
things,
will.
or he will. But I do feel like I owe it to him for this second opportunity that I've been given, because I know where my health was headed. I know that I was in decline. I know that if I wouldn't have gone through with this, that I probably would have died, because I remember sitting with my mom at the after the appointment where I saw the MRI, and they told me that I was going to need surgery. And after, over a decade of being told by all the doctors that were treating my Crohn's, like, the one thing you don't want to end up doing is going into surgery for this stuff. Facing that situation, made me fall into, a pretty deep depression.
Well, yeah, because for so long you were hardening your heart and saying, I'm going to figure this out. You were taking, your health into your own hands, and you weren't gonna, let some doctor tell you, you know? And so you were being quite prideful about, I can figure this out. I can do this, And so the conversation was centered around you. And then at some point, you had to surrender that, and you had to show a little bit of humility, and you had to put your faith in other people. And that's one of the things that my faith has taught me, is this concept of surrender. So often, like, I'm not on this podcast to win a conversation. I'm not here to win the political, thing of the day. I'm here only to encourage dialogue and to have an open, meaningful conversation, to these issues that we face. And the first thing in having open dialogue is surrendering that prideful will to win the debate, you know? And it's like, I don't care about winning the debate. I care about solving some of these issues. And here's the reality to our political situation, is that no one man has the answer, and no one's God. You know what I mean? So it comes down to having a humble spirit and listening, utilizing the Socratic method to come to some sort of consensus on how we can move forward as a society, and just ignoring the trolls that simply want to provoke, you know, reaction. It's like, stop being reactionary to this stuff. And that's the one thing that my faith has taught me, is that humble act of surrender. And that's one of the things too, is, I know what you mean about, you want to try to do the least invasive, more homeopathic remedies, and like that's the end all be all, but and you know, forsaking the allopathic medicine path. But it's like one thing that I've learned is that God operates in the imperfect, and don't let the pursuit of perfection become the enemy of good. And I see that so much where it's just like, especially in our politics, we have to have the perfect answer. You know, it's everything, you have to be perfect, 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 you know, and it's just like, I mean, what point to one thing on this earth that's perfect? You know, it's actually what makes the earth so beautiful is its imperfection. You know, it's not its perfections. That's why AI art sucks. It's not because it's not perfect, because it's pretty much perfect. You know, there's not one line that's not straight,
Yep.
and that's why it sucks.
And I would just like to add one last thing to my medical journey and why I eventually gave in to taking the pharmaceutical allopathic approach, to my treatment was that was in 2022. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We were at the peak of COVID
Mm-hmm. And the
in this
hysteria.
time, in the
Yeah.
hysteria. And so I was battling myself internally, but I was battling this external danger as well.
Mm-hmm.
This massive propaganda machine
Yeah, the
that was
madness of the.
attacking us. And so while I was at odds and with, feeling like this is the first time in my life I've experienced tyranny in real life, in real time,
Yeah, real tyranny.
I said, I'm going to surrender this fight that I have going on internally. I need to be my best and my strongest. And if they are going to offer me a solution, I'm going to take it because I need my health and my strength more than ever right now.
Mm-hmm.
And to surrender to that was brutal, especially at a time when I was questioning everything about the
Did you
pharmaceutical
get your COVID
industry.
vaccine? I'm sure they asked you in the hospital.
Well, I could tell you that I was a pissed off patient because every time I'd come out of surgery or whatever it was, they'd be like, "Oh, are you masking up?" And I'm like having to keep a mask over my mouth, but not my nose because I can't breathe, and I'm just like, this is just crazy protocol, you
Yeah,
know,
that's all it was.
and
Not based in science,
not knowing if I'm going to be
based in
able to,
feelings.
not knowing if my wife could be there in my recovery, not knowing if I could be at the birth of my child because they're testing us for COVID, all of these things that were just madness. And so there was definitely, it was a trying time of my life, not just medically, but spiritually, physically, mentally. It was like all out warfare at that point in my life,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And I think I even recall there was a moment during COVID where we were still working together. I don't know if you recall this, but I had a catastrophic meltdown where I had not an immediate family member, but somebody pretty close to our family who had passed away in the hospital, and he was separated from the family and died behind a curtain and a glass door away from any of his family members. And at that point, I lashed out in anger so much that the cortisol
Where's your
and
humanity?
stress
Yeah.
in my body got so angry, and I was crying and angry and screaming and telling everybody how psychopathic I was, and that, if anybody put me in this situation with my family members, that
Kick the doors down.
I was going to break the barrier down. Like, you will not stop me. And my autoimmune disease at that time decided to attack the upper digestive tract of my body.
Mm-hmm.
My whole throat went into an inflamed state. I went in because I thought I had like strep throat because of how swollen my throat was, to the urgent care. And they did some blood work on me, and they told me that I had cancer at urgent care.
Mm-hmm.
They said the only way that you could have this white blood cell count is if you have cancer. And
Well,
I remember,
you've always had high white blood because of the.
well, it's incredible. I left there and I followed up with my gastroenterologist. They slowly, one of the things I think you even helped me through and my family was, you need to